This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dee Dee Sharp, and welcome to this edition of The Aware Show. We're glad to have you right there with us. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This quote from the U.S. Declaration of Independence has been called the most potent and consequential words in American history and is considered a sweeping statement of human rights. For many in this country, the passage has been used to promote the rights of marginalized or underrepresented groups and represents a moral standard for which America should strive. Well, with the election of President Barack Obama, many have said this signaled the end of racism in America and proves the struggle for civil rights has truly been won. However, the Southern Poverty Law Center, an organization that tracks and monitors hate groups and extremists throughout the U.S., counted, get this, 932 active hate groups in the U.S., of which Florida has 51, the third highest count. So where are we in America? What is the status of race relations in our nation? Has the struggle for civil rights truly been won? Recently, 3 Black U.S. House of Representatives, including well-known civil rights leader Congressman John Lewis, who marched in support of the right to vote in 1965, claim they were spat on and racial slurs shouted at them, including the N-word by some white members of the Tea Party movement as the congressman walked outside the U.S. Capitol. Well, the Tea Party members who were protesting at the time deny this even occurred. Well, some will tell you these words are shouted on our playgrounds more often than you might think. Incidents like this, along with disparities in housing, employment, education, and health care, bring up the question that continues to be asked. How far have we come, and how far do we have to go to achieve equality, eradicate hate and racism? Tonight on The Aware Show, our guest, who are engaged on the front lines of civil rights advocacy, will share their perspectives as we try to gauge the status of race relations and civil rights in our nation. With that in mind, joining me here in our studios is our Civil Rights Roundtable discussion. Our guests include an icon in this area, Reverend H.K. Matthews. Next, we have Dr. Calvin Avant, Director of the Escambia, Pensacola Human Relations Commission. Next, we have Ellison Bennett, a representative with SCLC, which stands for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Pensacola Chapter. Elvin McCorvey, President of the NAACP, Pensacola Branch. Jerry McIntosh with Movement for Change. Susan Watson, Regional Director, American Civil Liberties Union of Florida, known as ACLU. Dr. Karen M. Combs, Principal of Eglin Elementary School and Executive Member of the NAACP, and also the Equal Opportunity Acting Chief at Duke Field Air Reserve Base. Sabu Williams, President of the NAACP, Okaloosa County Branch. And last but certainly not least, we have June Yen Stinnett, who is also a member of SCLC Pensacola Chapter. Many voices, one community here on The Aware Show. Thank you so much for being here, each and every last one of you. We'll begin with you, Reverend Matthews, because sometimes you don't know where you're going until you've looked at where you've been, and you, certainly an icon in civil rights, could do that for us. Take us there and bring us to where you think we are now, in your eyes.
Well, thank you so much, but listening to your opening statements about has the battle for civil rights been won? I think that a lot of us have been lulled to sleep by the fact that we think that it's been won, but based on what I'm seeing now and what I saw back then in the early days of the movement, we have allowed ourselves to be pushed back. We had made some progress, but now we are in the basis of being pushed back into retrogression. We certainly have a long way to go. We have been almost there, almost there. But now I have never seen the level of hatred in this country that I have witnessed since the election of President Barack Obama. And I have experienced some terrible hatred in this country. But the Tea Partiers and those who claim that they are working for the best interest of the country are really working trying to shove us back to a time that never should have been.
Ellison, I know that you, Elvin, Sabu, Karen, either of you from your organizations can attest to probably what Reverend Matthews is saying now. Any of you can speak to this.
Yes, I think Dr. King said it very well. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And that's certainly true in this 2010.
So how far have we come? When we look at faces like June's, who's joining us here for the show. June, your personal walk, tell us a little bit about your background before you even begin to explain to us what some of the things that you have suffered and where you are now.
My father was Chinese and my mother was Cherokee Indian and German. But we suffered a lot too because the era that we grew up in was after World War II, and we were called a lot of racial slurs too. And the time we lived in Virginia, and there was a lot that went on there too. For instance, you had to use, as they called, the colored water fountain and the restroom, but we were allowed to go to a choice of our school. So we chose the white school because my parents felt that it was a better education. And then after that, there was still a lot that went on the playgrounds, like you say. And you would meet friends, and then you would go to their houses and think, okay, we're going to play. But the parents would, you can't play with her. Oh, she can't come out today, because they found out we were mixed. And mixed, what is mixed? You know, everybody's mixed. So,
I guess you deal with that even now because
yes.
you're always going to be who you are. But tell us, what is it like now for you?
Oh, it's made me a better person. I've become aware of things that happened when I was little. So I want to make it a better place now. Yeah.
That's probably why you're a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, to make a difference, I'm sure.
Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Tea Party movement. Now, I can say that being a journalist myself and actually having gone out and covered one of these party movements really recently, I had a sense of, I didn't want to go because of what's been going on with it, but I didn't experience anything. We have experiences that have been somewhat documented. I think a lot of this now comes about because of the election of President Barack Obama. We've never seen some of the words and some of the things, some of the signs, some of the things that have been shown to us. Do you ever remember seeing anything like this, HK, in your history, or what?
I think it's at a higher level now. I've seen it. During the early days of the movement, we saw all kind of things, all kind of signs and all kind of gestures that were being made, taught us as African Americans. But I think with the advent of the Tea Partiers, it has actually gotten worse. I've never seen it at the level where it is right now. And these people who claim that the Tea Party is not fueled by racism, first of all, I don't know why they have to preface it by saying that, because I think former President Jimmy Carter hit it on the head when he said that these Tea Partiers are nothing but people who are fueling racism. And I certainly subscribe to that, because they're not, they claim to be demonstrating against a plan and all of this, but it's not the plan, it's the man. It's the president himself who that hatred is directed toward, and when it's directed toward him, as Mr. Bennett said early on, it's directed to all of us. So it's at a high level.
I think the concern too is that so many people thought that a lot of that was over when he was elected. So, Jerry?
If you look at the district attorney in Virginia, who was one of the keynote speakers at the gun rallies they are having around the country, what is the need for guns if you're having a protest? That and here Obama has already said and signed legislation that you can even take guns into the park, which I totally disagree with, because I feel that we have enough guns already that's on the streets that some of them need to be taken off. And in our community, there are young men and women, they're killing themselves at a huge number. And for those individuals to say that there is no racism whatsoever involved in this, it's kind of asinine to me for them to make those statements. And you got signs with a black man with a Hitler mustache on, and you're using all kinds of language, take back our country and all of that. We had to sit through Republicans, presidents, but we respected the presidency itself. And it has nothing to do with the presidency, but it has everything to do with this black man being the face of America now. And that some people cannot deal with.
And I might want to add too, just in terms of, we talked about the climate, but in December of 2009, I was the victim of a hate crime. And some of the things which Reverend Matthews talked about, we can't really show anything here because it was racial. The N-word was used. I thought there was a noose that was drawn on one of my cars, and then there was some of the pictures, which were
I've seen
things
those
that
pictures.
you
They're
see
very
way back
graphic.
in the
Yes.
60s, but just the climate is lending itself to racial incidents, hate crimes, which are on the increase. In the Southern Poverty Law Center's latest publication, there is one hate crime every hour. That's 9,000 a day. So, you know, I can attest that I'm a victim. And when I did call the sheriff, and because it was just on the windows and not on the paint, you know, I was told that they couldn't even record it as vandalism. So no pictures were taken, no report was made, and I knew it was wrong because of my position in the military as an equal opportunity person. And of course, I ended up calling Sabu Williams, who also works in EO, who told me, Karen, don't take anything off your cards, and came out to the house, and it was documented as an off-base incident. So we're talking about in 2009, and now it's 2010. This is continuing. Of course, you know, Sabu called the watch commander, and the same sheriff had to come back out, take the report, and take pictures. But see, that was not reported in the paper nor on the news. What initially happened was I was told they couldn't write a report. So how many other people of color, specifically African Americans, have been victims of hate crimes and maybe just were told? There's nothing that can be done.
Yeah, I use my H.K. Matthews skills in that case, you know, and that's talking to people and bringing them back. But let me just say that there is legitimate anger out there, that I don't think it's all racial, if you will, but I think there is some anger. I would be angry if we would have lost as well. Had Barack Obama not won the presidency, I would have perhaps been angry. But I think this anger has risen to a level now where it's allowed folks, particularly those who see as an opportunity to bring in the racial element. For instance, we saw the law that was just passed in Arizona. I think it was signed by the governor today. Certainly it's going to wind up being racial profiling going on there. A very, very heinous law, and I think these laws are going to start being passed all over the country, particularly in the South. And so we've got to be careful now that folks are not trying to use laws, as H.K. Matthews said earlier, to back us up. and their backing is up because they're angry because we lost the election, if you will. So now let's try to use the legislator to enact laws that will move us backwards rather than take us forward. But there is legitimate anger. They ought to be angry. They ought to be angry for all of the years under the Bush administration that we've allowed our country to get into the mess that we were in that we're now trying to fix. The problem is that their anger didn't seem to rise until after the election of our current president. And it should have been an anger several years ago when we were allowing financial institutions to take advantage of working families without any oversight whatsoever. So I'm just confused by this misplaced anger all of a sudden.
Susan, let's talk to you a little bit from the ACLU and your perspective. What would you have to say about this?
Well, I was just going to say, I think the Tea Party movement has just focused our attention on this, that there has been in our communities racism all along. It's just now really focused, and people are seeing it and paying attention to it, and where as before it was more institutionalized, now they're carrying signs. We see racism in our practice in the community in law enforcement. I've heard the N-word used by law enforcement officers here in Escambia County. So we can't just say it's just, I think it's exacerbated by the election of Barack Obama, but I think it's been here alive and well for a long time.
Yes, in our school system, when a counselor or a teacher can send an email to another teacher referring to a person using the N-word, and the superintendent never say anything to discourage that, or we have principals who are demoted for no apparent reason, and you demote 4 black principals, and you're saying that they are not ready to be principals, which they have for a period of time. You have 1 black coach in Santa Rosa and Escambia County, a head football coach. The superintendent would come out and said he don't see where that's a problem. So they are insensitive to the students and the community. And these are elected officials that come into our churches during election time and want to sing and shake hands and grin, but when they get in office, they forget about the people who voted them in.
I think it's sad and frightening. I really do. Not because of the level of racism and hatred, but because of the apathy that we're experiencing in our own community. I mean, where there's so many of us as African Americans who have been lulled asleep to believe that everything is all right, and there's no need for certain actions anymore. Again, the Tea Partiers have stolen our thunder. They're out there calling attention to that cause, while we're being complacent and sitting back and pointing fingers of blame. And of course, we do know that the fingers ought to be pointed, but we need to realize that when we point like that, there's one coming back at us. And there's some things that we can do in our community that these people realize that we're not doing. We have fallen asleep at the wheel.
Right. I would like to chime in on that because, as you pointed out, there are many problems in our community. But we as people in the community are not stepping up, making demands on our local elected officials and our state officials to help correct some of these problems. Education, for an example. Education didn't get bad yesterday. It's been deteriorating for a number of years. And every time we have brought the issue forward, we failed to get support from the community to come in and demand these changes that need to be made. As long as the citizen of Escambia County and the Pensacola community at large and Northwest Florida at large do not stand up and make demands on our local elected officials, things are not going to change. And there are a lot of problems, but the racial climate is being more focused today because we do have an African American president, but that is not the problem. The problem is there is a change occurring in this country, and that change is coming back because the majority race will soon become the minority race, and people have great fears about that.
Kevin, you've been kind of quiet. Here in Pensacola and Escambia County, what kind of calls are you taking in terms of maybe racially undertone?
We take discrimination cases in the area of employment, fair housing, and civil rights violations. And this past year, we had about 350 employment cases that were filed, but over 186 of those were African Americans, and that's totally out of proportion. Looking at the our demographics here in our area, and a great majority of those we were unable to mediate and make any changes. They had to be passed on and made formal complaints with the.
So they were valid.
They were valid complaints, and they went on to the Equal Opportunity Commission, where they made formal charges.
Well, if you had any doubt that racism doesn't exist, I guess that's proof, huh?
Yes.
136 cases?
186.
186 cases.
Yes.
Susan?
It's just not that. I mean, look at our schools. We're shoving minority children, children with disabilities into the juvenile justice system. We call it the school to prison pipeline. Look at what we're doing with people with former felony convictions, stripping them of their voice and their right to vote. Look at so many things that are going on in our community. Look at the criminal justice system and the numbers of young black men and women that are serving time for crimes that don't really hurt another person, like drug use or whatever. They're crimes to themselves. We've got to step back. We're creating a total underclass of people. We've got to step back and stop this. It's ridiculous, and it's not the American way. It's not the true American values that this country was founded on.
Well, see, that's part of the hypocrisy that we hear. We hear one group saying that we're angry about big government. You know, we want government to get out of our lives when it comes to health care and these kinds of things. At the same time, they want government to be intrusion. They want government to make sure that they put young black men and women in jail and keep them in prison. They want government to intrude when it comes to undocumented workers. They want government for what they want government for. But when it comes to a government where we're looking at a government that wants to take care of people, that wants to provide quality health care for all of its citizens, or wants to ensure that things are right, then all of a sudden government's intrusive and it's in our way, and we have these Tea Party movements. I went to a Tea Party rally in Fort Walton just last week. I was the sole African American there, but I went there just to hear for myself, to see for myself, and to ensure that the message that I saw locally, whether it mirrored the same message nationally. Of course, most people there know me, and so they were very nice. But I do think we have to engage with them because they are still in most cases, part of our own communities. And so rather than us saying to them, we're simply going to turn you off because you're angry and because you don't agree with us, I think we've got to be sure that we sit down with them and engage with them. My concern is one that was raised early by HK, is that the level of hate and anger that we're hearing, we're a sleeping giant. And when we wake up, and I'm talking about brown and black people, when something happens that sparks something in our community, I'm afraid of the outcome. Right. I'm really scared. And I'm speaking plainly that all of this that we're hearing on one side is going to wake us up on the other side, and we're not going to like what we see. And so we've been quiet. We have perhaps been lulled to sleep, if you will, but we've got to be careful that something doesn't spark the sleeping giant to waken.
So, Sabu, kind of explain to us what you mean by the sleeping giant.
Well, it's the silent majority, that group of people who are seeing what they're seeing on their televisions and their teleprompters, yet they haven't responded really, if you will. I think it's that group. It's really the majority, African Americans as well as whites and others and Hispanics, who are seeing things and perhaps becoming fearful of what they see. And as soon as something happens to spark that fear, then I'm afraid that they may indeed wake, and we may have some problems as we've seen in the 60s and the 70s. You ought to hear some of the horrible language on the NAACP telephone the recorded messages that we receive. I mean, it's just absolutely horrible when we answer the phone or when we hear the messages that are left of what folks are saying and doing. And so once that starts to
Are they
elevate,
threatening you? Are they using
well, absolutely.
racial slurs? Okay, I'm just
they're
trying
not.
to.
They're certainly not
Gotcha.
singing. You
Okay.
know, and
Kumbaya,
it's,
huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
and we hear it so much that I don't even report it. I haven't reported them in a while.
Right.
I just wish I could come through the phone sometimes and get to the guy who's calling us or the lady who's calling us.
And that's not really new for organizations who are fighting against discrimination and hate and that kind of thing, because I know the Southern Poverty Law Center has received its fair share of threats and that sort of thing. I know HKU on the front lines of the civil rights movement has had your life threatened, and at one point even had to have special security around your house 24/7. So, I mean, that's not new. And I know you guys know that when you get to those front lines that you're going to have to deal with it every day. So hats off to you for doing it. Somebody's got to do it. And we know that each and every day that you have to do it, that you probably do have to suffer through some ignorance. You have a comment,
When you
Calvin?
spoke to the sleeping giants, and that what has happened inside of our community, we've become reactionary. We wait till something happens rather than being proactive and going out and looking at issues on the front end. Because I know if you work on things on the front end, you never have to worry about what's going to happen on the back end. But our community have become reactionary. We wait till something has happened, and then we want to step up and want to do something about it. But there are many things that are going on now that we need to start saying things. That's when you start talking about the people in the Tea Party, they're comfortable in saying the things that they say. They're comfortable in doing what they do. You know, we were out on one of the local military bases where someone did an email and with racial slurs and picked all kind of people to send this thing out to. They're comfortable in doing this. This is normal now. Right. You know, and again, like I said,
well, they feel like it's their right, freedom of speech.
Well,
they can
I
say
think
this.
part of
They
it's
can do
filled with this anger, though. This is part of that anger. Hey, I can say what I want to say because I feel like I've been. It's some injustice to me, you know. You know, and because I remember, I kept thinking, I said, boy, how many times have I voted for people who didn't win? And I was able just to suck it up and accept the fact that we didn't win. Exactly. Because that's normal. That's normal for me. But when they didn't win, I mean, they just, and especially lost to an African American, it's on, and they've shown that through their behavior.
The Southern Poverty Law Center at the top of the show is indicating that there are over 930 plus hate groups documented. As Karen talked about earlier, cases that are not documented, how many groups are out there that aren't documented, who are busy? Maybe some of those same people who are giving you calls, huh, Sabu?
Well, right here in this area. Yeah. The militia groups that we know about that are out in the surrounding area on the reservations that are practicing, and they're not even don't even have names, just groups of people who are out there doing things with guns and in their sense preparing.
I think we have to be careful also as a people not to not to categorize people because every Republican is not awful.
Absolutely.
Right. And every Democrat is not wonderful.
An angel.
So we have to be real careful how we put people in niches and say just because this is a Republican that's a bad person. Because, you know, we've got some good people on both sides. But the thing about it, I still get back to the point, and I think Mr. McCarvey keeps bringing it up, and we all do, that we just got to wake up. We have got to wake up in this country. Because when you get to talking about the legal system, it's rotten to the core. Oh, yes. I mean, you have to call it like it is. And these district attorneys who have the lives of people in their hands are not concerned about justice. It ain't justice anymore, it's just us. So we have to be real careful and diligent and due diligence to make sure that we counteract some kind of a way. The kind of stuff I said early on, and this might not come across sounding too good, but in a lot of instances where we used to call people grand dragons and they wore the white robe, now we call people Your Honor and they wear the black robe. And they're doing away with so many of our young people and older people in the African American community. And we're just sitting back, you know, and saying, well, you know, we got to do it through the political system. Well, that's fine. But then there's another system that we've used that we're going to have to get back to in order to call attention to our plight. You know, people are not paying us too much of attention. Right. They really are not paying us too much attention. And I think Mr. Avan put it well. They're comfortable in what they're doing. And we're going to have to get them out of their comfort zone some kind of way.
Okay, so now, Karen, you have a comment?
I think Dr. Avon, as I heard earlier, does culture diversity training. And just to kind of segue into what I'm going to talk about, just yesterday there was one of the neighbors who came by. And again, this is months later, but she did express her, I wouldn't say sympathy, but she did say, I'm so sorry what happened to you. So it went into a conversation about really culture diversity and some training. All of us have to play a part. And I told her, you know, the golf course is right there, but do you realize that the inventor of that tee was an African American? And part of it is, you know, that we have to start somewhere, because when you raise the awareness of the contributions of African Americans and other ethnic groups to building this country, that it was built on our backs, you know, as slaves. And that's one of the things, especially my dad and I did years ago in 2006, is to author a book about the contributions of African Americans, which is a compilation. And as a school principal, it starts, I think Mr. McCorvey talked about it, with us, because this is learned behavior. These children don't come into the world. When I was called the N-word by a 4-year-old in California, in El Cerrito, as I was going up to high school, that 4-year-old didn't know what they were talking about. It was learned behavior. So that hate grows, but all of us have a part of knowing our own history, and I think that's what we're talking. We can't be apathetic. We have to have knowledge from whence we come, the contributions we've made, and just to give you a little.
And I was going to ask you to go ahead and do that.
Knowledge, you know, it's for all Americans. And
what's the name of your book, Karen?
It's called The African American Quiz Book for All Americans: A Wealth of Knowledge About History and Culture, Past and Present. And it's well laid out. It's for church groups, it's for organizations. Maybe I'm going to give one to the Tea Party. And so that they can quiz one another. That's one of the things that's happening, the ignorance of not knowing what we have done to contribute to this country. And we have to have the knowledge so we can share in conversations and correct people when they think, all we did was to be slaves in this particular country. There's so many things we touch every day, which has been the invention of an African American and other ethnic groups. And so when you raise awareness, there's plenty of research on this, is you begin to eliminate, in some cases, but also to reduce the kind of hatred or misinformation that you have about people of color. So, and I think all of us, you know, all of us play a part in what we do with our friends, with people who don't know, so they can begin to, you know, it's on your mind if someone tells you what the truth is.
And
it's speaking truth to power.
And that's where I was going to go. I'm glad you brought all of that out, because my question just before we went to you had something to do with some of the things that HK and some of the others that on the panel even said. What can we do? Because most importantly, by the time this show is over, it's not necessarily just to say, here it is, because a lot of people experience it every day. They know what it is. They know it's here. It's what can you do? What can we do? And it's such an individual thing, but then it's a collective thing. And we'd like to leave our viewers with a sense of what can we do.
I think one of the things that she just mentioned, we've got to let people know who we are. I mean, we really don't know who we are. Some of us have this really blighted opinion of ourselves. And I think the book that you're saying, it should explain to us who we are. We don't need to try and convince other people who we are. We need to convince ourselves of who we are first. And when Sabu mentioned the sleeping giant, there's a chapter in my book that's called Awakening the Sleeping Giant. And that book was circulated all down in South Florida, which was required reading for people in choice schools, because we've just lost sight on the contributions that we've made to this country and what all we've done. And as you said, it was built on our backs.
And I think he hit the nail on the head. And Mr. McCorvey and everybody, we're in the same ballpark, so to speak, because I believe hatred is taught. There's not a child born into this world that come into this world not knowing how to speak any language that would utter a hate word. Hatred is taught. In the state of Florida, the Department of Juvenile Justice, their statistics shows from 2007 to 2009, 82,000 young people went through the system. 82,000. So in our schools, our teachers must be sensitive to the needs of the community. And what are we teaching our children if we are adults would send emails of hate or make the comment to a person who is the custodian who does a great job keeping the environment of our schools safe, don't end up the garden. So these are the languages that is being used in the school system in Escambia County. And it has to be from the superintendent's office down. They have to come out, in my humble opinion, with a statement saying this rhetoric, this bigotry, this hatred will not be tolerated.
You know, I think it's more than just a statement, because some behavior has to change.
Attitude.
You know, it must change because in our school system, there is an overrepresentation coming out of our school system into the juvenile justice system right here in Escambia County. You know, spoke with Judge Ross Goodman, and he said that they're coming in his courtroom, and he's finding them with charges that should have been handled in the school and not being sent to the courts. And he's saying that something's got to be done. We've got to make some changes, and it has to do with, remember, most of our teachers are of the minority race, and not understanding the culture when a kid might react, and maybe he's doing something wrong. But we know if you give him a few minutes, he'll calm down, he'll be back in place. But what they do, the second he does it or she does it, then they will step in and call in the SRO or whoever, and then they're giving put a charge on him and send him on out of the class.
And therefore he's not learning.
Right.
And then he's going into a system that's way, way more than what he needs to be doing in terms of discipline.
And the sad part about this is that we're losing most of our students in elementary school. They're lost before they get to middle school.
You know how many children went to juvenile justice last year from Florida? 20,000. 20,000 children in Florida went from the public school system into the juvenile justice system. That's a waste. What a lost resource.
I'll mention this.
Go ahead.
Dr. King's assassination was not because of the stance he took on civil rights, but it was because of the stance he took against the Vietnam War. Right. And when people put themselves in places of authority, they have to bear the brunt. And I'm going to tell you, right here in this county, I would dare say that the superintendent of schools is one of the prime perpetrators of a lot of stuff that's going on in these schools.
Well, let me say HK2 as well.
Well, now that is your opinion, not the opinion here of WSRE or
That is
anyone's here, but that is...
May I rephrase that?
Okay.
In my opinion.
Right.
In my opinion.
Okay.
Not to hold the station liable,
Right.
but the superintendent is one of the main perpetrators of what's happening.
Okay.
But let me say, and to Dee Dee's question about what we can do, and oftentimes we do throw out statistics and tells you how bad the problem is, and we know it's bad, and we've known it's bad. The reality is what we've got to do, and what are we telling people to do, especially those who are looking at this program. And I think people have to become engaged. As we've said earlier, is that we're sitting at home, we're below the sleep. We've got to become engaged, even with the Tea Party movement. We've got to become engaged with those who are opposed to our positions. We can't simply just allow folks to have their voices being yelled at and positions being told, and we're sitting at home. We've got to go to our school board meetings, to our county commission meetings, to our city council meetings. We've got to stay on the front line and be engaged. Laws and things are being changed because we're sitting at home and allowing it to happen. And then, coming behind the fact and saying, oh, gee, that's so unfair to us. Well, where were we? Are we running for office? Are we voting? That simple little thing that you fought so hard for, HK, and others around this room have fought so hard for us to do, to go and vote. And we're finding, you have 16%, 22% turnout. That's ridiculous. so we've got to hold ourselves accountable as a people as well. Look, I'm all for saying that folks are bad, but I'm also for showing that we've got some work to do that we can do ourselves. We ought not to be running around here every time it's election time trying to pull folks out of the churches to come and go vote, and you get a 10% turnout. And then we wonder why we have the results we have. It's going to continue to do that until our folks, until that sleeping giant wakes up and becomes active in their community, then we're going to get what we're going to continue to get.
Jerry?
I wanted to say the media, in many instances, has been complicit in helping to perpetuate a lot of the things that are going on, especially if you watch the politics of this country. We talk to our children about conflict and resolutions and all of that. And when you see the ads on television, how they attack ads, how they attack one another, we get our politics has become a bully mentality. So the children see this and we act as if they don't see this. And we're telling them, don't do this, don't do that. But by the same token, we're doing it. Well, I would say the politicians are doing it. The radio stations that they're listening to, or we listen to anyway. If you listen to some of the stuff that's coming out of there, the venom that's coming from there, that's poisoning the atmosphere in such a way that many good people begin to believe this stuff. Hitler said this in his book, that if you tell a lie long enough and big enough, even you will become to believe it. So there's a perpetual lie that is being told out here about people and about the situation and the condition, and they are not talking about the poverty that affects everybody, both black, white, brown people, and at the bottom of all of that is poverty.
June, let's get you back in this discussion. What do you think, as just someone who's involved with the SCLC and as a minority yourself, what do you think can be done?
Well, what I think is that when a man can see a man as a man, a woman as a woman, a boy is a boy, a girl is a girl, and a baby is a baby, not what color, but when they can see him as a man, then it'll be better.
That's beautiful in thought, and I see what you're saying, that if it could ever happen. But do we have a long way to go and a short time to get there, HK?
We've got a long way to go and a short time to get there, to be repetitious on what you're saying. We certainly have it. It's a good thing to do, but we certainly ain't got a lot of time.
What are you doing, Calvin, with the Human Relations Commission in Pensacola and Escambia County? What are some of the things you're doing, even on the economic front, to try to balance and bring equality and that sort of thing to the table?
Well, we started working with Maritime Park, and we've been added to the Contractors Advisory Committee to try to assure that we receive what was stated in the covenant, which was that it's a $38 million project, and as a part of the covenant that was written, we should be receiving 33% of those funds that will be expended for constructing the park. And we've requested to become the ombudsman and be the watchdog to assure that happens. Also, we've filed a federal complaint against Ecua, our utilities company. They received $130 million from FEMA to relocate our plant from downtown to Cantonment, and that's public assistance grant money. And once you receive that, you are mandated to have inclusion of minority, women, and disabled firms. And we did a public records request and found out that that's not happening. So we filed our complaint, and we've now received back from the Department of Equal Rights for the Committee on Homeland Security, who have accepted our complaint and will be coming here to Pensacola to do an investigation. And they said within the next 180 days they will give us a finding from our complaint. But you know, because I feel like economics is a major part of what happened. If you give people a living wage, a lot of our social ills will change, because people don't have to do things that they have to do. And if we're not given the opportunities, it will never change. So that's why our office is starting to look at these organizations and to let everyone know, all the other firms and organizations here in the city
and county that we're now putting our eyes on them. And we will be watching everything that they do, and if they don't conform to what the guidelines and rules and regulations are, we will do the same thing with their organization.
SCLC, what are you all doing?
Well, certainly we've been engaged year-round in the struggle for civil rights, but more importantly, there's a new crime gang prevention committee that's formed, along with people from FDLE, State's Attorney's Office, doctors from Sacred Heart, and we are glad to be involved with that committee. We will be going to the communities, talking to the young people, finding out what are they angry about. It is very disturbing to me that in the last 3 years we have had 8 young people between the age of 14 and 19 murdered here in Escambia County by other young people. So I say again, hatred is taught. What are these young people angry about? So we're glad to be a part of the Gang Prevention Committee. We'll be going to different communities, and these young people are putting their faces on Facebook with guns and money in their hand. They're not ashamed. So someone is going to have to try and reach out to them. But parenting, we want to say it's got to be a major part of it.
Calvin, what do you think has to happen?
4 years ago, we did a series of discussions here in the Pensacola community. And many of those discussions were held on the campus here at PJC. And we dealt with the issues that are affecting this community in a negative way, and we came up with solutions. But as is the case most of the time, when you come up with solution and you present it to government, you get the reply, we don't have the resources to make it happen now. But yet and still, they find resources for other things. So we are going back to the local governments here saying, we gave you the solution to the problem, now let's deal with it, because these problems are not going to go away. They're going to continue to escalate. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to continue. And as my friend Sabu said, a sleeping giant is going to wake up, it's going to explode in this community, and then they're going to be trying to put the lid on, and it's not going to be possible to do. We got to do it before we get to that point. We got to deal with it.
Jerry, you have your own radio talk show. You also are very active with Movement for Change. What do you see, and what is your organization doing, and what are you as a journalist doing?
Well, one of the things that Move for Change do quite a few things, but by the same token, we look at issues like law enforcement. If we feel that agency is not doing what it needs to do, we go out, we got a political arm of Moving for Change. We go out and work to get another person elected over and over again. That's just one thing. But as far as the radio show, we try to educate people about what's going on in the community, feed them knowledge that they would ordinarily not get from just listening to music, because music, I love music myself, but it's not enough to feed our young people music. They need to be educated. So, but then I work with the Mother With program too, with Mrs. Blackman over there, where they bring in students to teach them how to think, to teach them the deep thoughts. What are you going to do? You know, you say you want to be doctors, lawyers, and all of this, but what have you done to get to that level? So you teach them the deep thinking of how to get there, how to get their finances in order already before they even get out of the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. Also, you also have to look at the hierarchy of needs of our young people, the security, have they had food this morning, all of those things are situations that they have to deal with in school to learn how to not get into the prison system itself. So we work with that also.
Very busy. Susan, ACLU.
Well, racial justice is one of our main focuses here in this region. We, of course, work in the school-to-prison pipeline, working with watching a watchdog for law enforcement, doing rights restoration. What I would love to do is to engage my colleagues here, everybody here, and one day sit down and start to talk about some of these more institutionalized issues that we need to be able to get a hand on. You know, the court system, you know, those things that are really tough and hard to do and hard to figure out. You know, let's start this conversation. Let's talk about them. Let's educate the community and see where we can go.
And that's what we're trying to do with the Aware Show. And we plan to do something again in the fall to kind of blow this up a little bit bigger and zoom in and focus on it a little bit more. So I think we're all on the same page with that, Susan, and I'm glad that you're saying that, so you can get the cards from these guests after the show and keep that discussion going. Karen?
And as an educator, primarily, since that's a focal point, I've started in inner city schools in Oakland, California, and now in Florida. But in terms of, as a principal, to have a diverse staff, because children have to see African Americans and other people of color in those teaching their children, and that's how the appreciation increases. It was at our school, actually, when President Obama, when the election results came in, when we had our kids vote, you know, 67% of our children voted for President Obama, which is, you know, it was part of the message they heard about all the things about change. Well, it starts with us. So principals of color have to step out and hire diverse staffs. Now, what do? Then you have training. What do the libraries look like? Those of us in organizations, I'm in the Links. I'm a member of the Pensacola chapter of the Links Incorporated. We are philanthropic, but we reach out to young people. I'm Delta Sigma Theta. We work with young girls. And some of those girls now are going on to college. We went into places that they called not so desirable, maybe low-income areas. But those young people we've worked with for several years. American Businesswomen's Association, Mr. Williams can tell us just the things we've done in Okaloosa County with our latest event, the Haiti event, in line with NAACP, so people will see the kinds of things we're trying to do to make communities better. It takes all of us, and it's, you know, you'll be amazed how many African Americans, if we represent 13% of this country, and how many people are not members of NAACP, SCLC, and the other organizations, but we're out here fighting for their rights. That needs to change. People need to join forces and reach out, get into these communities. One professor at Temple University said our African American students sit on the periphery of education, of the classroom, because we're not included. You know, if you look at the filaments and the lights, that was an invention of an individual, Lewis Latimer, who had part to do with, we know Alexander Graham Bell, but when we talk about others, like Lewis Latimer, then we say, well, who's that? That was an African American, had something to do with the filament. We talk about your ironing board, Sarah Boone, because we were ironing the clothes. So we have to be able to include that in the textbooks, so our children, our African American boys, feel good about themselves. Our girls feel good about themselves. And then another ethnic group says they made contributions to this country. That raises and increases the awareness and appreciation for us. So we have an outreach to do as educators and community people.
Sabu?
Well, you know, the Bible tells us that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. We still have a lot of work to do, but as you said around this room, so few people sometimes to help us do it. You know, we hear about it takes a village to raise a child, but it really takes a community to raise a village, and there's so much we need to do. It's not just focusing, if you will, on one thing. We need to be concerned about our health. We need to be concerned about economics, about education, about politics, and all of the things that are going on, and it takes some villagers, and there's too few of these villagers. Too many folks are still sitting back and allowing the few to try to do the work of the many. We need to get the entire village involved in this community, and we've got to engage even those who don't agree with us.
June, do you have a comment?
I was just going to say that it has to start with you, with us, everybody.
Okay, and HK, I guess we're going to let you have the final say here.
I think one of the things that we all need to learn and think about as people, that we've got to learn to turn, and this is an old adage, turn to each other and stop turning on each other. And I think that's what we need to learn to do. And when you talk about the contributions that we've made, everybody knows about Sears because they leave the name Roebuck off because Roebuck was also an African American. And so a lot of our kids a lot of our adults don't know our history. And this is why sometimes we don't like each other.
Okay. I think, Sabu, you had some final comments that you wanted to make too before I
Well,
wrap this
I
up.
think this is a very important discussion. I'm glad we had an opportunity to sit down and that WSRE provided this opportunity for us and this august panel of people are here. We've got a lot of work to do in our own community. We talk about the country, but the reality is let's look out. We got to look in Pensacola, Fort Walton, Crestview, the surrounding area. There's a lot of work. There's enough work to be done, and there's plenty of laborers to do it if we can get them up and going out and doing it.
Okay. Any other comments?
Education is the key. We have to make sure our children at an early age is receiving the best education they can receive. And I just can't thank the governor enough for signing that bill on yesterday, putting $22 million more into choice schools. That was very important.
Okay. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for being there. That's all the time we have now for the Aware Show. Until next time, stay informed and stay aware. I'm Dee Dee Sharp saying good night.